Max Verstappen takes an epic victory at the 2024 Qatar Grand Prix amidst steward and FIA chaos. This is Shifting Happens, episode 6. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Shifting Happens. This is episode 6. This is the review of the Qatar Grand Prix. Your race winner was Max Verstappen ahead of, I need to remind myself of the result, it was Charles Leclerc and Oscar Piastri, but it's safe to say that this race was full of chaos from the very beginning. Let's just get straight into the chaos. We've got the FIA Defender-in-Chief here, Marshall. Sorry, I should actually point out my panel. I haven't pointed out the panel yet. We have got AJ. We have got the FIA Defender-in-Chief, Marshall. We've got Rory. And working diligently behind the scenes, as always, we've got our wonderful producer, Fly. So, yes, Marshall, take us through your thoughts on the FIA chaos.
Well, I'm wondering what happened to the debris flag. First of all, I think that a wing mirror is a sizable part, but by no means, under my interpretation of the regulations, would that be a yellow. I mean, I understand it's in a very fast and dangerous part of the track, but that is what the debris flag is for, is to tell people that there is debris on the track. So I understand, if you've got a large piece that's going to cause chaos, then you would throw a yellow if it's blocking the track. But a little wing mirror, I was surprised they didn't cover that with the debris. And then if it was probably a matter of they didn't have a gap that was sufficient enough to call a VSC, and they were probably resistant to do a full safety car for just that mirror. Probably should have been in hindsight as to what happened. I was a little bit surprised, though, that for one, that Valtteri hit it, because it's not like everyone didn't know it was there by that point in time. And I mean, the punctures that kind of threw the race into chaos and resulted in the actual safety car being called after Valtteri hit it was not really shown on the broadcast. So I'm not exactly sure how or where the debris that they hit was after Valtteri blew up the mirror. But yeah, I mean, everything is always easy to say in hindsight. Yeah, I think my takeaway on it is, if you've got a yellow flag, you have to follow the rules. Whether that yellow flag can be argued is not really the point. But I'm sure we'll get into it.
No worries. Cheers, Marshall. Rory, I know you've been critical of the FIA in the past. What are your thoughts on everything that transpired, not just with the wing mirror, but the penalties that we saw for Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton and everything that took place during the course of this Grand Prix?
I have been wrong in my criticism of the FIA in recent times. I will admit I'm not the sole criticism, but I do think this one, watching it on the F1 TV broadcast, definitely not F1 TV. I mean Sky F1 in my region. But no, I think with that incident, like Marshall said, it's all hindsight. Yes, worse debris flag, and with the yellow, it could be probably, I think with the VSC, they probably didn't have the gap to put marshals on the track. It's from looking from the broadcast I saw when Valtteri went over, the people saying as well, like before I mentioned about Valtteri hitting it, it's that it was in a dangerous spot, because everyone says, like, the point if someone says, oh, it's not on the racing line, but once you start to overtake, you are on the racing line. And that's what Bottas had to do. Bottas had to get out of the way for the cars coming behind them to be lapped, and or it's been overtaken either way. But that disintegrated, and then the debris, of course, a lot of shrapnel is going to hit it's going to take out damage to tires. From what I saw, it looked like the coverage didn't show where the tires actually became punctures. I think it was more slow punctures that the tires, you could see that the tires were they went over on the main straight around where Valtteri hit it, and then throughout the lap, I say with the loads and the pressures the tires went through, they just disintegrated. With Lewis was unlucky. We'll probably talk about him later, that his puncture probably happened a bit too early on the lap compared to Sainz, whose puncture happened a few near the end of the lap, so he wasn't really compromised with his time loss in the pits and so forth. With, like Marshall said, you have to, when there's a yellow flag, you have to abide by the rules, even though this people criticize when the FI say double wave yellow flag, you have to be prepared to stop. And it's with Max, Max was of course on the radio complaining about it, but with the telemetry shows that Max slowed down and Lando kept the full throttle. So there's even Andrea Stella wasn't shying away from the fact that Lando didn't kept the full throttle. So he knew there was nothing to fight about. So yeah, I think Lando will have in the debrief and understand why it happened. He just got out of the car and he's probably just still full of adrenaline and doesn't know, hasn't really been fully briefed by the team, so forth. So I think he's in his recent social media messages, he's understood why he got a penalty, I think.
Yeah. I mean, we'll talk about the severity of punishment shortly, but AJ, your view on just sort of general view on what happened with the FIA.
Cheers, Baxty. I think for the amount of complaints that we're getting from the FIA for this Grand Prix alone, I think we should be thanking the FIA, because of their decisions, we had an entertaining 15 minutes of the race. If not, it would have been an absolute snooze fest, the way it was before and the way it was after. There's literally only one part of the track that you can overtake on. Everything else about the race was boring, apart from the two punctures and the penalties that were caused. Like I personally don't enjoy the track, and say what you want. Like, yes, penalties have been harsh. We will get to this later when it comes to the severity of the penalties. But I think the only really call for action here would have been to do with the debris and not to do with the punctures. Because the thing is, like what you were saying earlier, Marshall, there should have been a debris flag. So I was on the F1 TV broadcast, and that's what they were discussing, because they couldn't see very clearly if it was a slippery track or a debris on track flag, because it was supposed to be a yellow and a red, or yellow and orange, something like that. But they said that there was some issue where they couldn't really see what flag was up clearly. But that wasn't the problem. When it came to Lando had nothing to do with the debris thing. And on the stream that I was on when I was watching, it appeared initially that there was a marshal that came out of the sort of pit lane initially and tried to attempt to go and get it, but they moved on to a different part of the track after that. And when they came back to the start and finish straight, the mirror was still there and the marshal wasn't there. So I guess they had attempted to go out, but they were then called back in. Don't know what exactly went down there. Maybe you could give us more of an insight to that. But yeah, that's essentially what I saw on the stream that I was at. And when Bottas hit the mirror, it just scattered through, I want to say, probably about 75% of the width of the track. It didn't hit too much on the right-hand side. From our side, it's the right-hand side, but on the drivers, it was driver's left. Driver's left still appeared to be clear. And that's where I'm a bit confused with the punches, because some of the drivers were already complaining about the worry about the tires earlier during the race, right? And just so happened, coincidentally, after Bottas hit the debris and the debris sort of like went all around it, that's when the two punctures happened. But correct me if I'm wrong here, if any one of you guys remember from memory when I'm picturing the race again, both punctures were on the left front of the cars. And I don't think, at least when they showed the snippet of how the debris flew, it doesn't seem like it got to a part of track where it would affect your front left. Again, that's what's up in the air for me. I can't tell what really caused the punctures. It's going to take a lot of rewatches to be able to determine it, but definitely something could have been done about the debris. Either way, I'm grateful for whatever the FIA did, because if not, that race could have put me to sleep. So I'm glad for that 15-minute bit of entertainment and chaos.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much going on. I mean, on the Sky Sports, the Crofty was making jokes about the fact that there were more penalties in this race than there were in the World Cup final, and there were a lot of penalties in the World Cup final 2 years ago. So I did enjoy that little quip there. I mean, yeah, look, we had the. I think the wing mirror one is the one that has caused the major controversy, and rightly so, because why was that not addressed? I mean, I take Marshall's point that it seemed like there just wasn't a gap for them to be able to do it. But I mean, is this a case of maybe safety needs to trump everything here, and they just throw yellow flags and throw a safety car out, even if it's a short one, because they've just got to eliminate all risk? Or was this very much somewhere where a debris flag would just be the best way of doing it? I don't know. We also then had the penalty for Lando Norris for speeding under yellow flags. He was given a 10-second stop and go penalty. Lewis Hamilton had 2 penalties. He had a false start penalty and a speeding in the pit lane penalty, for which he was given a drive-through. The false start penalty was 5 seconds. Albon got a 10-second penalty for forcing Magnussen off, or a slight collision with Magnussen. Then there was also a post-race penalty for George Russell for safety car procedure. So yeah, a lot of penalties. And I think the thing for me with these penalties is that I don't disagree with the fact that the penalties were given. I mean, certainly, Lando's one, he was speeding under yellows. He was a bit unlucky because the double wave yellows started as soon as he hit the sector, but at the same time, McLaren probably should have been on to him quicker to say, oh, double wave yellow, slow down, and it has cost them a huge amount of points. My bone of contention with it is the severity of the penalty. A 10-second stop and go penalty for that is ridiculously harsh in my view. I mean, I can't think of many penalties that many times this has happened, but this seems very overplayed in my view. I don't know. I mean, Marshall, you want to come in on this?
Yeah, it's a slam dunk, man. You can't ignore yellow flags. That's a fundamental safety issue, whether the yellow flag should be out there or not. You cannot ignore yellow flags in a race. You can argue that, but here's the thing. The recent precedent on this, Dimitri Mazepin and Nicholas Latifi were both given 10-second stop and go penalties at the conclusion of the 2021 Austrian Grand Prix for ignoring yellow flags, passing incident with Kimi Räikkönen on the last lap. And that was the most recent time this has happened. It is a very rare penalty. And I know that it seems harsh in the context of what's a 5-second, what's 10-second, what's a stop go. But this is a fundamental safety issue. And if you don't give the standard penalty, then what's to cause the precedent to change? And then somebody will say, oh, well, in the previous instance of this happening, you only gave Lando a 5-second penalty. So how can it be different? This is something you have to penalize to the maximum extent when it happens, because you can't encourage that behavior. You can't encourage ignoring yellow flags because it is so fundamental to the safety and operation of a racing car on any circuit, from the top level to the weekend racers at club tracks. Like, yellow flags mean caution, and if they stop having that meaning, then why are they even out there, right? You need to lift in a yellow flag, and unfortunately, I feel bad for Lando because it is a disproportionate penalty given what happened, but I don't disagree with the penalty being standardized in that way for that offense, because it is a fundamental thing. You can't ignore yellow flags. And, in addition to that one that we had with Mazepin and Latifi a few years ago, I do remember Jacques Villeneuve got a race ban for ignoring a yellow flag in a practice session in the middle of his championship battle with Michael Schumacher in 97. So, this is something that's always been taken seriously. And even then, in that time, that was seen as being extremely harsh on Villeneuve. I remember that as being a big deal at the time. But, you have to respect yellow flags. And I really see it as a slam dunk. I feel bad for him that it ruined his race. And obviously, it makes McLaren's job in the constructors a little bit harder. I still think they're going to be okay. But yeah, I don't think the harshness of this penalty not matching the crime is an issue in and of itself, just because this penalty is so rare that we can, count on a couple of fingers the last times it's happened in the last, decade. So I don't see it as that bad.
Yeah, so my bone of contention isn't with the penalty itself. I just want to be 100% clear on that. Lando 100% should have got a penalty. He did not slow up under yellow flags. For me, it's the severity of the punishment, which, first of all, Marshall has cited precedent, which I didn't know. So therefore, that is a tick in the FIA's box. They've gone, well, actually, we have given this penalty before, so we have precedent. Fair enough. Fully accept that. But then, why is it so harsh? Well, okay, safety issue. I mean, it's poor, and maybe McLaren need to look at their operations as well. In regards to that, I don't know. AJ, there were other penalties as well. The one I want to talk about is the Lewis Hamilton drive-through for the speeding in the pit lane. I cannot remember the last time that somebody was given a drive-through penalty for speeding in the pit lane. My question to you is this: was it harsh? And secondly, do we think that this is Rui Marquez, as basically indicated by Toto Wolff, that this is Rui Marquez saying, no, I want harsher penalties for these things now that I'm the race director? What's your thought on that?
So, in terms of how harsh it is, right? I think that's going to be subjective to each person and how you interpret it. It's going to be very hard to justify whether something should be penalized harsher or something shouldn't. For example, in the case of what you guys were talking about earlier, as harsh as it is for Lando, I think being a fundamental, rule where you shouldn't be ignoring yellow flags, that 10-second stop go penalty, very much warranted, regardless of whether it ruins your race or not. You should know better than to do that. Similarly, when it comes to speeding in the pit lane, there's a reason you have speed limits in the pit lane. There's so many people around. It poses danger and threat to so many things going around. In the context that, yes, you had the entire field going through the pit lane, there was no need for him to be going that fast to begin with, because everyone was in a queue going through that. So regardless of what the penalty was or what the penalty should be, it definitely was a penalty. There's no doubt about it. Slam dunk penalty on that front. In terms of drive-through penalties and Rui Marquez putting his foot down and wanting more severe penalties, all for it. As long as you can remain consistent, on your decision on what constitutes a penalty and what doesn't. And I think it looks like that's the direction that they're starting to head towards. If you can maintain consistency on the types of penalties you call, by all means, harsher penalties, sure. But don't dose out penalties for hard racing. That was what I was happy about. We had some hard racing on track, and there was some, wheel to wheel racing, amazing racing. there's no need for penalties when drivers go hard racing, unless it's really, really dangerous. Harsher penalties, I think it's been a while since we've seen a drive-through penalty. Sure, bring back drive-through penalties, because I don't think a drive-through penalty is as harsh as a 5-second penalty, a 5-second stop-go penalty, or a 10-second stop-go penalty. I think a drive-through is one of the more lenient penalties out there, and fittingly so. I mean, he didn't really do anything too crazy. It was one of the fundamental rule breaks, which is speeding through a pit lane. Drive-through penalty, I think it's fitting. I can't think about what else they could have given that would have been any less harsh.
I mean, normally it's I think if my memory serves me right, 5 seconds, I think, is what people have had for drive-throughs in the past. Is that right, Rory? Or
well, you asked first about was the last time there was a drive-through. Lewis Hamilton would receive a drive-through at Miami this year for speeding in the pit lane, but he didn't serve it he didn't serve it because it was converted into a 20-second post-time race penalty. So Lewis has had this penalty before, but the thing is, with speeding in the pit lane is usually 5 seconds, but this is under safety car. You are under safety conditions. You're supposed to be maintaining a speed that is if there's people on track. Yes, you're going through this pit lane, but there will be personnel in the pit lane still, so you have to maintain that speed. It doesn't. The 5 seconds is under race conditions when it's up, but you're under safety, so that's another thing with the severity. Safety is important, so you're go ahead, Marshall.
Yeah, I want to jump in on that one. So first of all, your thing about like, is Rui being tough? Rui doesn't call the penalties, the stewards do. So it doesn't really have anything to do with Rui. It's all what the stewards decide. And the severity of the penalty is usually based upon how much over the limit you go. So if you miss it by a ton, then you're going to get a harsher penalty than if you're like, 80.5 or in the 80 kilometer zone. If you're like, it's the same as speeding on the road, right? Like if you blow the line completely, which it looks like Hamilton may have done because he balked and then Lando was right behind him, and yeah, it looked like he just might have missed the spot for the activation of the speed limiter. If he blew it by a lot, then that could be why they gave the penalty. I haven't seen that steward's decision. I wonder if the speed that he was doing is in the document, because that might solve your question.
yeah, so my question about Rui isn't, obviously I know he doesn't give the punishments out, but what I mean by that is he sort of saying to the stewards that I think we should give harsher penalties here, like maybe leaving room within his director notes to be like, look, we should be harsher here, because I mean at the end of the day, he's now the one in control of things, and I mean maybe it's a directive from on high, I don't know, but I mean maybe they want harsher penalties for these offences.
So I replied to Marshall about what the speed was for Lewis. The speed limit for the pit lane is 80 kilometers. Lewis Hamilton was doing 92.5 kilometers in the pit lane under safety car.
That's not good. Yeah, that's over 10%. Lewis, slap on the wrist. You should know better than that. You should know better than that.
So that explains the penalty. I think it's not too harsh.
Yeah, under safety car and you're that far over. Yeah, that's not good from Lewis.
Also, according to Autosport, the FI are also putting together an explainer on some of the decisions made during the Qatar GP. So they're doing a debrief. Basically, so there's actually this is happening, but
oh wow, they're doing an NBA 2-minute report.
I don't know when it's been. I don't know when it's been released yet, but that's according to Autosport. So
yeah, but that's the thing. We were just talking about that, right? Like, obviously I don't think this was live, but we were talking about this on our own time, where if they are going to be dishing out penalties, the one way to actually get fans more engaged is if they explain the types of penalties and what and why it happens. And the fact that they're doing this, I think that's really a good thing and a good sign moving forward. And to be fair, now that we're talking about the penalties that have been given out this race weekend, I think the only one that's going to be a bit more on the fence and iffy was the Max one from yesterday.
Yeah, I was
Apart
just
from
moving on to
that,
that.
yeah, apart from that, I think everything else that was given today, rightly so, as it should be. No complaints from me. As the only issue was the fact that they didn't remove the debris. That was the only fault throughout the entire thing that happened today. And thanks to them, we had a somewhat entertaining race for 15 minutes.
Yeah, so let's talk about this Max Verstappen penalty from yesterday, because it was a big thing. He was in, I believe it was Q3. He was believed to have, adjudged even to have impeded George Russell, but the contention here is that, and he was also going. He was going too slowly, essentially, on that slow lap, because you have to stay within certain parameters. Here's the thing for me with this, because first of all, neither him and George were on hot laps. If George was on a hot lap, this is a slam dunk 3-place penalty, no problem at all. But they weren't on hot laps. And also, like, the delta as well. Like, I mean, that in itself, we've seen that so many times last year, this year. That's a reprimand. We've only ever seen a reprimand for that. Whereas, and I think that the impeding as well, for me, again, is a reprimand. Now, unless they've decided, well, 2 reprimands equal 1 place. I mean, the 1 place penalty does have precedence, but I didn't think that this was necessarily a penalty. I mean, Max was talking quite openly after the race that George was basically insisting that they give him something, and it kind of fired him up to get past George into turn 1, which he did. And he's been quite critical of George post-race. But Rory, what's your thoughts on this? Because I mean, even as a Mercedes fan who benefited from that penalty, I thought it was a load of crap, to be honest.
Yeah, I was on Instagram scrolling and I see this pop up my feed. Max Verstappen is reported to get a 1-place group penalty. I said, this is interesting. So I was in a call with a few people, and I was just like asking them, and like we were just waiting for the report to come in, and then we see the document box arrive, and it was I was expecting a reprimand, like you said, Baxi. Like, it was kind of from Preston said it was like Yuki got a reprimand the day before in practice, I think, for not maintaining the right delta. But it's now the question is, are they going to keep this precedent going forward? It's going to be interesting. It's the 1-place group penalty has happened before with Nico Hülkenberg in the 2016 German Grand Prix, when they used they used the wrong set of tires in qualifying. They didn't return basically tires in practice, and they used an extra set in qualifying. So that's what got him the 1-place group penalty. And I think Sergio Perez as well in a more recent, in around 2020 or 2019 either. Could be wrong on that, but yeah. Yes, Max has gone with his way of words in the press in post-race. He's supposedly called George Russell two-faced and how he interacts behind the cameras and in front of the cameras. I think there is politics going on between that. I say there's with George being the president of the GDPA, there could be some back and forth probably in what's happening. But yeah, it's honestly, it's like you said, they were both on build-up laps, so I wasn't thinking it'd just be a reprimand. If that was, like you said, if it was George was on the fast lap and George was on the fast lap and Max was just preparing, then it's an impeding, I think, the penalty. But yeah, I just thought it was a bit strange and a bit. I had to look more into it and understand it.
Yeah, I mean, Max's comment suggests that the only reason he got a penalty was because George wouldn't let it go and was basically just so insistent that it should be a penalty. I mean, look, sportsmen and women are always going to look for an advantage over their opponent. I mean, Red Bull are the masters of this. So I'm laughing a little bit that Red Bull are moaning, they're being really, really mean. And, it's not so nice when the shoe's on the other foot, but I'm not going to hold that against Red Bull too much, or George.
Yeah.
I mean, quick.
It's like,
go on, Marshall. Yeah.
it was like when I saw those comments by Max, I was like, finally, we have a little bit of needle between two drivers on the grid that aren't just playing nice. Like I want to see some rivalry. I want to see some dislike, but I do find it a bit hypocritical given that, you know, we see Jonathan Wheatley or in the past going to Michael Massey and asking for remedies to everything that they think and like and that could be a penalty. Like they're the ones running the teacher more than anyone else. And we saw today, like they were whining about Lando's move to not slow down. Like Max was ratting him out to the stewards while Red Bull was going down and, you know, yapping at the race director to get it investigated. Now, I would like to think that, you know, they checked everyone, not just when this, like the appearance could be that the squeaky wheel gets the grease, but, you know, I would like to think that they've looked at every single car that passed that yellow and that Lando was the only one that made that offense. But it does sometimes seem like it's very reactive to who does the most complaining. I do think George on his radio messages is probably the funniest driver on the grid for whining about everything everybody else does all the time. So it is like, it's not like it's not like the secret that George Russell's like this. We know it because we hear him whining on his radio constantly every time he's in like wheel distance of another driver. He's complaining that somebody's doing something to him. So that he's sitting there in the steward's room and being George Russell is just, yeah, George Russell's going to be George Russell. Like, if he thinks he's right, he's going to sit there and argue it. And it's just, I love the needle. I love the rivalry. It's been a long time. I hope this develops over time. I hope that they don't patch it up. I want to see this like blossom into a nice little conflict, because we haven't had a proper driver rivalry that has had any real meaning. Probably, geez, I would say
Nico and Lewis.
Yeah, I mean Nico and Lewis, and probably I don't know, probably Alonso and Hamilton have had it at different points in time. And you know, going back a little bit more, you probably had it a bit with like Montoya and Schumacher. Like they had some real comments with each other, like and then of course Villeneuve and Schumacher never got along. Like I love that. I love that. It's been a long time. I hope that this kind of grows, but at the same time, you know, Max complaining about it when Red Bull are like the first to get on the horn and whine about anything they see is just kind of funny. It's all funny.
The one thing that I do want to add to that is, right, it's not just the fact that Red Bull are the ones who complain all the time. Tell me which driver on a track, be it practice, be it qualifying, be it race day, be it sprint, which driver doesn't whine a bunch? They all do. It's
Lando was
nothing
doing it to
new.
Lewis. He was the one that dobbed Lewis in.
It's everyone does it. So like this pointing fingers here and there, come on, man. Every single person on the end of the grid has done it. It is nothing new. It's a ridiculous comment to make.
George is prolific at it, but he's by no means alone.
We've actually got a comment from our producer Fly in the comments. Now, obviously, if you don't know Fly is a massive George Russell guy, and he says, "You mean I hear it every race, Marshall?" Lol, because he's always riding on board with George, so he probably knows better than most of us how all of this works. Rory's Wi-Fi's died, so he'll be back shortly. If you're wondering where he's gone, but he should be back online shortly. Let's move on from this, because we could talk about FIA chaos all day if we wanted to, and trust me, I'd love nothing more than to cook the FIA, but we must talk about the World Constructors' Championship, because what was looking like McLaren were going to put it out of sight has all of a sudden just opened things up a little bit. I think based on where we are now, and I've got the standings here, McLaren are in the lead, 640 points to 619 against Ferrari. Red Bull are now officially out of it. They are done. They will not be retaining their title this year. So it's a straight shootout between McLaren and Ferrari. It's a 21-point gap from McLaren to Ferrari. That is still quite a gap for Ferrari to make up. I mean, basically, the simple thing is they have to go 1-2 next week to have any chance. AJ, you're the Ferrari fan here. Can you see it happening, or is this still very much McLaren's in the bag to lose?
It is McLaren's in the bag to lose. As much as I want to say Ferrari can do it, and I think they can, because if Lando pulls another bottle as he did today, anything can happen. I will say though, Abu Dhabi is a better track for Ferrari, so I expect them to be on the front foot. Both drivers, both Carlos and Charles, have been on it this season, but in order for them to have any shot, any chance at all at turning this in, both Charles and Carlos have to be dialed in even further and harder than they have ever been this entire season. They really have to pull it out, and that team orders and whatever else aside, the entire team from top to bottom has to be dialed in Abu Dhabi in order for Ferrari to have a shot. If not, it's McLaren's to it already is McLaren's to lose. I mean, Charles and Carlos 1-2 would definitely be, I think, the only way I see Ferrari winning. But also, I gotta give props. If that happens, it means Charles will get P2 in the WDC. So
yeah, because actually Charles has really closed the gap to Lando. It's 7-8 points between them now, which is 8 points between them, which is crazy. And I think Rory, you predicted that Lando wouldn't finish P2, though you did also predict that the highest placed McLaren driver would probably be Oscar Piastri. So we'll just gloss over that one. But
yeah, we got sort of. I think I cursed Piastri. I think every time I put something on a driver, I cursed him because I did it. If anyone doesn't know, I did predict Checo Perez would win the championship in 2022 and 2023, and then that didn't go very well. 2022, I had more. Well, it was actually both that had more chance of hope. But but no, I did predict Piastri will be the highest placing McLaren, and I am wrong on that part. Piastri, I think I cursed you, but that might not be true. You did fall off a cliff after Austin, but yeah, I know you were on the podium this weekend, but still, and then also that really unseriousness of the sprint race yesterday, you and McLaren. But good to Lando, fair play for defying team orders and going with your gut. But overall, still, you nearly bottled that swap because George nearly got past at the last minute. But no, yeah, I think with constructors, it's going to be interesting. Both teams can't afford a DNF going into the last race or double DNF or anything like that. McLaren could the penalties did affect them today. They could have actually had a chance to actually either seal it or make it very difficult. Out of the 44 points going into Abu Dhabi, they needed Ferrari to score 42 points at one stage in that race, so that would have sealed them the championship. But yeah, McLaren looked like they could still walk away without anything this season, which will be another talking point if that does happen. But it's Ferrari, it could be Maranello's in that turn, Maranello's first constructors in a long time, and either way, how the fans see Carlos this season, he's going to be treated like he's going to be treated as if he leaves Ferrari, he won't have to probably be given free Ferraris for the rest of his life because of what he's brought to Maranello and Ferrari. But yeah.
The other thing, sorry, really quickly, I think the other thing that's going to be really important about next week for the Constructors' Championship is also how the Mercs and the Red Bulls perform, because that could very well turn the tides. Um, it's going to be a really interesting race because I believe the Red Bulls and the Ferraris should be strong that next weekend. When I say Red Bulls, of course, we only mean Max. Um, but yeah, that's what it looks like. All conditions have to go right. Essentially, all things have to go right for Ferrari, and they are going to owe the Mercs and Red Bull a huge one if they help out.
Yeah, that's a great point actually. I mean, just for some context, McLaren haven't won the constructors championship since 2008, 1998. Sorry, and that's 26 years. And Ferrari haven't won it since 2008 was the last time they won it. I'm getting the two mixed up though. Bloody hell. 2008 was the last, so 16 years. I mean, McLaren haven't really got close to it probably since 2010, I would say. That was probably the last time they got close. Well, 2008 as well, in fairness. And would have won it in 2007 had they not been naughty boys. And then Ferrari really haven't got close to it since. I mean, they just have not got close to it since. They've been just, rubbish, really. They never really challenged Merck for the constructors. It was always Vettel against Lewis. But yeah, Marshall, quick one from you. Who's going to win the constructors next week? Is it McLaren or Ferrari?
I think it'll still be McLaren, but Leclerc has an outside shot of ending P2 in the drivers, which would be super funny. So I hope that it happens just for the chaos factor, just to be an interesting ending. But I think McLaren still has the gap to Ferrari in terms of performance, that in a regular race, it would take something extreme for Ferrari to outscore them by, the 20-point margin or thereabouts that it is right now. But I do think, like you were just saying, Ferrari hasn't really challenged for the constructors since they had a driver lineup of Raikkonen and Massa. Well, I think this just goes back to the praise of, like Rory was saying, of Carlos. It's like Ferrari just hadn't had a driver that was taking enough proportion of the points available to even make Ferrari a player in the Alonso and Vettel years in the constructors. So yeah, I mean, Carlos does deserve some plaudits for being close enough, most weekends, and on occasion even ahead of Leclerc. I mean, like, because Ferrari typically was operating on the Red Bull, Checo Perez, Max Verstappen rules, like that's how they operated for over a decade, was to put all their eggs in one basket and just try and win the drivers. So it's going to be something to watch for. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, definitely not doing that at the moment, and definitely not doing it next year. Not with Charles and Lewis in the car, that's for sure. It's going to be interesting to see how Ferrari handle two Alphas in their car. Go ahead, AJ.
Yeah, no, really quick. Just on that note, since we were talking about how close the constructors and the drive for P2 is on the grid, I just wanted to point out how good of a season we're having in F2 and the F1 Academy this season as well. Both of those have been really, really close seasons throughout, and I think as a whole for the Formula One, F2 and F1 Academy, it's been a year of solid racing throughout, and I don't think we've had one like this in a long time.
Yeah, so just to put some context on that, F2, we got 2 races to go, both in Abu Dhabi. 0.5 of a point between Bortoletto and Hadjar, and I think Paul Aaron has a half a chance, but we're talking Lewis Hamilton 2010 vibes here. He's basically there in name only. And then F1 Academy, get my British flag out. Woo! Yeah. Abby Pulling has won the title. Alpine young driver getting the job done. A rare dub for Alpine. Or in her case, she's the only one bringing dubs with the Alpine name on it. So yeah, congratulations to her on when. Though they only got one race this weekend because the second race got cancelled due to safety because there was a massive crash that damaged the barrier, which understandably they had to fix. So let's talk.
With the F2 0.5, if I was wondering why there's a 0.5, it's because the Monza sprint race didn't. I think it either didn't go ahead or there was it was reduced and they could only do half points at the time. So that's why there's kind of there's half points in it.
Yeah. And also there's 17 different race winners in F2 this year, 5 of whom aren't driving on the grid currently. So
and it'll be six in Abu Dhabi because Maloney's going off to Formula E next week, and he's
he's
done,
isn't he? Zane Maloney who.
And with the 17 race winners, there's been 31 drivers who competed in this F2 championship this year, and 17 of them won a race, which is insane for F2.
Could you imagine if 17 F1 drivers won a race? It'd be impossible to determine who the champion is. That'd be chaos. Oh my god. I mean, we spoke about all of this. Oh god. We've spoken about this FIA and World Constructor stuff, but we do have to give flowers to our race winner today, Max Verstappen. Did get pole initially and then had it taken off him, as we've already discussed. Got George Russell on the line, got him into turn 1. Obviously, then Lando went past as well. But I think Max, this was a really intelligent race from Max because he had the pace, but Lando was chasing him all through that first stint. I mean, it was consistently 1.8 seconds all the way throughout that first stint, and Lando had a chance of winning it basically up until his penalty. So, Rory, I'll come to you first. Was this a thinking man's win for Max? And do you think this is one of his better wins of the season? I mean, it's not his best. That's Brazil.
It's not his best this season. And considering it's Max's 9th win of the season, considering how he didn't go, he went on a spell of 8 or 9, 10 races that he didn't win. It's mad to think that he's won 9 races with the narrative.
Well, he did win 7 of the first 9.
I know.
So, yeah.
And it was going. I know Max didn't get pole, but that would have been Max's. It would be Max's first technically pole since Austria this year, because he was fastest in Belgium, but then he got a penalty. He had to take an engine penalty, so that's why everyone was saying Austria. But yes, he didn't get pole. George had a much faster reaction time, but Max had a much better start overall.
Yeah.
And he got past George, and then Lando decided, I'm going to have a good start, which Lando's actually had some pretty good starts in the last 2 races, considering that we kind of criticize him for his starts in general. But with the Max, I think it was very critical. Max kind of going into this weekend kind of felt like that vibe. He doesn't really care how the season's going to go. He kind of just wants the season to be over in his comments regarding the FIA and so forth. And the drama that's happened so far, he kind of just wants it to be over and have a rest. But yeah, it was one of his best drives, not his greatest drive of the season, but also it does show that we saw where the Red Bulls were in the sprint race, and they were nowhere in pace. And then you see the operational excellence of Red Bull, and you could say that they're still the best operational team on that grid. There are 2 sim drivers, Jake Dennis, the Formula E world champion and multiple WEC world champion, and Le Mans winner Sebastian Buemi. They were in the sims working hard, and they got the right setup. They were doing some testing on Sergio Perez's car in the sprint race, and they found something that worked. Max had more balance. He felt better in the car. Even Checo got the Q3 in a qualifying session, which is, yes, he was nearly a second off Max, but still he made Q3, which is it's sad that we're actually celebrating a P9 in a qualifying session. And then we had, of course, the pole that didn't happen. But yeah, I think this race just showed that if Red Bull are not on the pace, they still can find something in their operational compared to a Mercedes, or even like McLaren had the pace in the sprint, but it looks like they lost time in or something happened when they were doing changes between the sprint and the race.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Marshall, this is the question I want to aim at you, and that is: have Red Bull turned a corner? Because that performance from Checo, like, yeah, Checo, okay, look, we can meme Checo for the start of the sprint race yesterday when it was green and he was just like, what do I do? But it seemed to me like Red Bull found a setup on his car, which they then transferred over to Max. And it felt like as though it's like, actually, I think we might have just solved the problems. This felt like a corner turned for Red Bull. Did you get that impression, or was this just a we got it right this weekend?
We'll find out next weekend. I mean, everybody, this season's been weird, and that sometimes certain teams just unlock performance one weekend and just show up and the car works. And I mean, the change from the sprint to the race indicated that they found something. But whether it will carry over or whether it has anything to do with their performance elsewhere, we've seen, like, Mercedes show up at Vegas and just dominate, and that didn't indicate that they'd turned a corner with their car or anything. Like, it just, some circuits and sometimes you can just nail it and it doesn't really mean anything. I think Red Bull are still operationally pretty good, and they're never really that far off as long as they have Max in the car. So yeah, it doesn't really surprise me. It never really surprises me when they're out front anymore. It's just remarkable that we're talking about, have they lost it? It's just, we'll see next year. I guess that's the answer.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think if Max wins in Abu Dhabi, I mean, he's won Abu Dhabi every year since 2020, so it'd be his fifth in a row there. Then maybe you think maybe they have got on top of the problems that they've had this year, and will give them a lot of momentum going into next year, which would be good for them. Maybe not so good for everybody else. Now, I have seen some comments. We do have comments coming in. Friend of the channel, Henron, saying, can we talk about the bad office day for Mercedes and the disagreement between Hamilton and Bono retiring the car? I'm going to take the lead on this one as the Mercedes fan here, because, look, people know me as a bit of a Mercedes defender. I try and defend them as much as possible. I can't excuse today. I mean, if we're talking donkeys of the day, they have to be in the conversation. Lewis from the false start, what the hell was he doing? I mean, I know people were saying, oh, why wasn't Lando penalised for his false start? Doesn't matter. They both false started. Doesn't matter that Lando didn't get penalised. That's a different conversation.
It's a sensor thing. So if the sensor doesn't go off, exactly. Get a penalty. Yeah.
Exactly. So. Yeah, Lewis false started and it just all went wrong from there. There was the shocking pit stop for George Russell that was putting George on hard tyres, even though he was like, maybe we should have been on mediums, because Alonso's pace on the mediums at the end of the race was pretty good. So for that last stint, I think the mediums would have helped him. And then obviously Lewis has had the penalties that we've already spoken about, and he got the puncture. I mean, it was one of those days that anything that could go wrong did go wrong, and it just poured rain on us all day. It was almost like, you've had your 1-2, now we're just going to dump on you from a great height this weekend. Screw that success you had. Just you don't deserve any goodness for more than one race, Mercedes. How dare you try and think you might have improved things round. I mean,
but
no, they were poor. They were poor. Go ahead.
So you would know this because I'm sure that you have a way better memory on these races than I do. But a lot of people are making a lot about Lewis wanting to retire the car, and just saying I'm done with today as being like, oh, he's done with Mercedes and blah, blah, blah. I've seen a lot of hot takery online and stuff. And I don't necessarily think that that's got, like, Lewis has done this before, where he's wanted to retire a car when he's had misfortune in a race, and Mercedes has actually told him to stay out. And and I'm trying to remember what race it was, but I believe he actually scored points.
Yeah, it was Austria 2018, I think. There was one instance where the car was like, it was when Mercedes had that cooling issue with both cars, and I think Shez had mentioned it not in here, but in our discussions, that he was told that he couldn't drive the car. The car was being difficult to drive, and he told, let's retire the car, save the engine. But the team said, no, we believe that you're on track to score points. Or even, I think it's happened in more recent races and more like 2023, 2022 especially, I think. Yeah.
I remember it like in
Spain
2022,
I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, this is just like Lewis's hyper competitiveness coming out, that like when things go really bad for him, he always has this kind of like visceral reaction to everything, like the misfortune befalling him, and just wants to give up at certain points. It's almost like that competitive, that ultra competitive battery in him just loses its charge, and he says, nuts to this, and it's happened before. So like everyone's saying, oh, he's quitting on Mercedes. Stop. Like he had a bad race. He's done this before when he was signed with Mercedes long term. It's no indication that, like Jensen on the broadcast even said, oh, I bet he won't even show up to Abu Dhabi. He'll be there. Come on. Like Jensen said that on the broadcast, and I was just like, whoa, that's extreme. But that was when Ocon was spilling the beans that he might be gone. So,
Well,
we'll get to him.
He might be there.
Might be there. May not be. We'll see.
But the for Jensen to say that, I felt was pretty unfair. Usually he's pretty good on his commentary, but I felt that was a little bit off base.
I would say this to defend Jensen a little bit there. What I will say is that he was using what Lewis said in Brazil and then about Brazil a few weeks later to kind of inform, well, maybe Lewis might feel like packing it in, because he was pretty upset post Brazil, and that's why he said what he said on the radio, and then clarified that in Vegas, saying, yeah, I didn't want to come back. But after this race, I think Lewis he's kind of like, no, I just want to get to Abu Dhabi and get it done. I think let's be clear about why the retiring of the car. I think he was frustrated, clearly, and he wanted to retire the car. Bono said no, simply because they wanted him to serve the penalty before retiring the car, much in the same way that Lance Stroll did. So Stroll was going to retire the car, but then they said, well, actually, no, you got a penalty, so let's serve the penalty and then do another lap and then retire the car. And I think Mercedes wanted Lewis to do that, but then Lewis just decided, you know what, actually, I'm just going to finish the race, because there is actually a problem with the car. I can't really allow my frustrations to get the better of me. So to answer your question about the car, Henron, that answers it. It was just, if you're going to retire the car, serve the penalty first and then do it, because that penalty would have carried over into the next race, which obviously they did not want. So better to avoid that than carrying it forward and allowing Lewis's last race with the team to be as smooth as possible. But yeah, I can't excuse Mercedes today. They were poor. They were really poor. AJ, if you're there, I know you wanted to come in. So
so really quick about Lewis, right? Like as I think more than anything and more than anyone, he has been the most frustrated at his drive this season. But with that being said, and even though Mercedes really fumbled it this weekend, and even though he was on the verge of retiring and wanted to retire the car, think about this for a second. He had a 5-second penalty. He had a drive-through penalty, almost retired the car, was dead last, and still pushed himself all the way up to 12th in the end with not that many laps left to go. Like, at the end of the day, like it or hate it, as critical as you can be about someone, he still has it.
yeah, no, I agree. Look, he did have a good final stint. It was just one of those races where everything went wrong for him. Now, quick shout out to Sauber, Kick Sauber. They got their first points of the season. Zhou Guanyu finishing in P8. Magnificent drive from Zhou Guanyu. He's actually driver of the day as well, as voted for by the fans. Great to see them get their first points of the season, and now means every team has scored points this year, which is great. We don't like to see anybody finish on 0. But our last talking point of the day is Alpine, because breaking news in the last hour or so, Esteban Ocon is done. with Alpine. He's not coming to Abu Dhabi to be part of the Alpine team. He will not be driving that car in Abu Dhabi. It will be Jack Doohan making his debut a race early, because he's due to be making his debut in Australia. He'll be doing it in Abu Dhabi instead. Ocon, of course, it was announced earlier this year that he would be headed to Haas and joining Haas. Whether he turns up in the Haas garage in Abu Dhabi, I'd quite like to see that, because it'd be quite chaotic, really. But Ocon, it was a mutual parting of the ways. From what we've been able to infer is that Ocon wanted to do the post-season test with Haas, and Alpine basically said, if you want to do that, you have to leave now. And so therefore he decided, I'm going to go now. Things have been pretty sour between him and the team basically since Monaco, when he had that clash with Gasly. He's been pretty comprehensively beaten by Gasly this year. I believe Gasly's running a slightly better spec car than he is. Rory, are you surprised that Ocon's gone a race early, or was this inevitable given the tension that's been there all year?
I was shocked to see that the reports that by Thomas Marr originally of Planet F1, who said that from his comments in the media pen that Ocon was thanking the Alpine team for the last 5 years and his mechanics and the car they gave him this year. And that's what's kind of being inferred, and it's kind of other sources are saying that it will be announced. It's been reported, but the team's declining comment at the time. But I'm kind of surprised it's happening now. I think it's not. I know F1's it's a harsh sport and it's a critical sport, but for a driver for Ocon, who's been with that team 5 years, multiple podiums, won their first race in a golden amount of time back in 2021. I think I wish he kind of could have got that final send-off in Abu Dhabi for the team with the plaque outside the garage and the team giving him a guard of honor kind of. But it looks like he's just going to have to go. He's going back to Enstone to thank the team and so forth. It'd be interesting, like you said, it was mutual in the sense that it was more Alpine saying if you want to leave, you have to go in your own volition and say that you want to do the preseason test, because it's understandable. Haas is a direct competition to Alpine now, because you see with the top 6 constructors fight at the moment. So it's understandable that they don't want to give too much more. They know they're losing a good driver. Alpine this year actually had a very solid lineup. It's just that they didn't have the car for most of the year. We're seeing what Gasly's able to do at the moment and reliability. Ocon, yes, has tension. Relations has been great, especially under the Bruno Famine regime. And since Flavio's come in, Ocon has been whenever there's been upgrades or lighter chassis, Gasly has got all the new parts and the lighter chassis. There was before Gasly signed his Gasly was already signed, sorry, but up to the summer break they were swapping out the chassis between them each race, the heavier, lighter, and then I think Gasly just stuck with the lighter chassis from the summer break onwards or the last few races, and Gasly and now Ocon has just been relegated to using what's spare parts they have in older spec. And I think that's the drop off. I don't think these last few races have represented Ocon's true pace. I've been critical of Ocon, but I do think he's a much better driver than it's been portrayed in these last few races. So yeah, I think he's going to do very well at Haas next year.
Yeah, getting all the bad parts and still beating Gasly in Brazil when they got the double podium. So look, I think it's sad.
You ever notice that about Ocon? That he always gets the big result, even though he's like never faster than his teammate. He got the win in Hungary. He got the second place in Sakir when he was beaten all year by Danny Rick. He always manages to put together that big finish that and have Alpine's best result, but he's never the fastest driver over the course of the season.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, I mean, look, obviously it's sad to see the relationship end this way, isn't it? I mean, they've been together for 5 years. They kind of saved Ocon's career after he got dropped by Force India, Racing Point, in favour of Stroll. That was at the end of 2018, so he missed 2019, wasn't it? Yeah, I think Haas is a good pickup for him. But yeah, there's a lot happening at Alpine at the minute. AJ, your thoughts before I get into the Alpine thoughts. AJ, your thoughts on Ocon leaving? I mean, this looks to be a done deal to me that Jack's going to make his debut in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, no, I think would it have been nice, like Rory said, for Ocon to have a proper send off? Yes, it really would have been nice for him to have a proper send off. But at the end of the day, does it make sense? Yes, it does. Because it gives Alpine a chance to see how Doohan can do in the car and what things they need to work on before testing and so on and so forth. Also, to add to the fact that Doohan has actually contributed a lot to Alpine in terms of their development as their reserve driver. Like he, without a shadow of a doubt, has been a big part of their development throughout the season because he's been putting in the work behind the scenes. So in a way, it's good to give him a go at the car that he helped work on. Simultaneously, considering all the fractured relationships that we've seen, we've heard about, it's not really surprising. I do think Ocon gets a lot of unnecessary stick. He is a good driver, and I can't wait to see how him and Bamman pair up in Haas, especially if Haas perform as well as they did this year. If the car is as good as it was this year, surprisingly, that none of us expected at the start of the season. I think it's going to be a good ride between Ocon and Ollie next year. It was definitely a good pickup. It's a shame that we're not going to see him one last time, but at the same time, we didn't really see Danny Ricks one last time properly. So, it happens. It's a cutthroat sport. Ocon is not leaving the sport, so we're still going to see him. Not too big a deal. Not too big a deal. Yeah, no, it makes sense from a team's perspective. It makes sense for both teams why they would want it to happen. So,
And now Abu Dhabi is going to be the first time in history that we've had the son of a World Rally champion and the son of a MotoGP champion on the grid at the same time.
Interesting. Yeah, of course, because his father is Mick Doohan, who's a 5-time, 500cc champion, but yeah, MotoGP world champion. It's just, easier to say that. Now, let me put my conspiracy hat on just for a second. Marshall loves my conspiracy theories, particularly when it comes to one Flavio Briatore, because I've been thinking about this for a little while. Now, obviously, I actually think next weekend might be a little bit make or break for Jack because there have been rumours that they have been wanting to get rid of him. They've been known to be talking to Franco Colapinto. I know that they were interested in Carlos Sainz. Mick Schumacher has announced he's leaving Mercedes and will be going to the WEC team. Will be with Alpine WEC again. Peter, how you doing? Sorry, our good friend Peter's just coming. Gasp, not the conspiracy theory hat. Yes, Peter, it is the conspiracy theory hat, I'm afraid. Lovely to see you. Thanks for coming in. So is Jack going to survive? Could this be his one F1 race? Because they want Colapinto, Schumacher's there, Paul Aaron's just been named as the reserve driver. And who does he drive for? He drives for High-Tech. Who used to be the team principal of High-Tech? Oliver Oakes, who's the current boss of Alpine. There are some rumours suggesting that High-Tech might take over Team Enston as well, which would then see some little-known Russian driver called Nikita Mazepin potentially come back, and then that might put Aaron in the car as well. I think Jack kind of has to perform here, because if he doesn't, Flavio's going to go, oh, well, he's a load of crap, see you later. Is my conspiracy theory, am I right to think that, AJ? Or am I perhaps putting a tin hat on and not a conspiracy theory hat?
This is a loaded one. I think with the Nikita rumors, that's definitely tin hat. That is not.
No, that's not tin. That bit isn't tin hat. If High-Tech get an entry, Nikita's in. because that's where the money's coming from.
High Tech is bankrolled by the Mazepins in the background, apparently.
Well, not directly, because
not
Mazepin
direct.
Not directly. We have to be very clear on that, because Daddy Mazepin is still subject to international sanctions.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Like, it's going to be really harsh on Doohan, because the performances that the Alpines have been putting in towards the end of the season, it's going to be really, really harsh on the kid. I mean, I like Doohan. I like him as a personality. I think he is a good driver. It's going to be super harsh, but again, we know that this sport is cutthroat. It definitely is. And then you add, I don't know, man. I don't know. This is a sticky one, you know. It's
Anything is possible when Flavio Briatore is part of the team, isn't it?
That's the thing. Like, if it was anyone else, I don't know. If it was anyone else, I'll be more hesitant and be like, yeah, no, this is Tin Hat. But the fact that it's Flavio there, I just hope he does well, because it'll be really harsh. Would it be nice to see Mick given another shot? Yes, it would. It definitely would be nice to see Mick given another shot at F1 under a much more, even though Alpine is unstable, it's definitely much more of a warm environment compared to what Haas was under Günther. I don't know. You've got me stumped on this one. I do not know what to think.
Well, whilst you kind of think about that, Marshall, I know you love a good Flavio Briatore chat.
Anything is possible when you're talking about Flavio Briatore. I think that's a team in transition with a lot going on. I wouldn't necessarily put anything past them. The Colapinto chat, I don't see that as a option that has that much more upside. But it depends on, like, we're talking about next year being basically a lame duck year with the Renault power plant before the regulations change in 2026. I don't think Alpine is looking at any sort of real uptick in form. Like, they might build a better car, but they're still going to be, in the midfield or, in the back of the midfield, battling with, Stake, Aston, Williams, all those cars. So I don't know. I wouldn't put anything past Flavio. The other thing we know for sure is that they're no stranger to replacing drivers in season. So, he'll be on a short leash, which is unfortunate, and it's never a great way to start your career. But you're not wrong to be suspicious of how that team operates, given the personnel and the transition that they're going through. I think, people who made the decisions on Doohan are probably not there anymore, or at least enough things have changed that their perspective may have changed. Like, Oaks wasn't there. Flavio was just brand new coming in. Probably famine had more to do with that decision than not. Yeah, I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility. 3 months, 4 months is a long time until the first race next year. So, hey, crazier things have happened in Formula One. I'll put it that way.
So, real quick to jump in on that, I think, like, pretty much what Marshall said, anything can happen with Flavio. That's why I was really stumped. The one thing that I think won't happen is the move for Carlos. Because that just, to me, it's going to remind me too much of, like,
Well, that's because he's going to
battle
Red
of
Bull.
we're gonna open another can of worms, man. Come on. That's another can of worms. But to stick with Alpine, I think it's gonna be a repeat of Pierre and Esteban if they bring Carlos on. And I don't think they want that. That's my only reasoning as to why.
Yeah, I don't
think
think
that's
Carlo.
gonna
I
happen.
think when he was a free agent, they were interested in bringing him in along instead of doing. I think, but then they decided to turn him down and go with doing. Rory, as a somewhat Alpine fan, I believe I think it's probably fair to describe you as. What do you make of my little theories? Would it be Mick? Would it be Paul Aaron that they would bring in? I mean, what do you think?
Aaron in F2 this season has been unlucky with his reliability in some instances with the Mechrome engine, which is produced by somewhat of the Alpine regime and some forth. But I honestly don't think Mick is in any contention for any F1 seats. I think he's bound to stay in WEC at the moment. He'll stay in WEC for a full season. I think at the moment there's still a bit of doubt around Mick in F1. I think I know he wasn't in the most warmest environments at Haas, but I think people are still because he's done well in WEC and he's been consistent enough, and the Alpine hasn't been too bad in WEC. His reliability has let them down in so instance. But yeah, I just don't see Mick being in contention for an Alpine F1 seat. I see more Franco Colapinto. There has been photos. I know photos don't mean anything really of him just talking to Flavio. But if say Jack was in the car, I think Jack being put in the car, like Marshall said, I don't think most of the people who made that decision were probably gone out the door by then. And I think they just picked Jack. I think Jack, he deserves a shot in F1 to see what he can do. I think overall, he wasn't Alpine's first choice of putting him in that seat because they went after, there was rumours with Carlos, etc., and Carlos decided to go the Williams route, and there wasn't really much more free agents around, and they didn't really trust any of their own F1 academy. Besides, so they picked Jack anyway from the academy. First time they ever really picked. They kind of ruined it. They stopped the joke of Alpine and Renault never picking from their driver academy. But Jack has done a lot of similar work, and he's embedded in that team. I think, yes, just give him this race weekend, see how he does. I don't think there's that rumor that he only has like a 7-race contract. That could be true, could not be true. But I do think he's there for the start of the season at least, because I think, especially for the Australian Grand Prix, the marketing and so forth, Alpine could do what Jack doing on the grid for Australia, and just see how he does. Maybe just use this as a bed-in session. See does he overperform, but don't put too much pressure on him. He's just jumping into this car for the first time. Test. I think he's done FP1 sessions, but this is his proper goal in this car in a full race weekend.
Well, yeah, no, I hear you, and it'll be interesting to see how he gets on. There'll be a lot of eyes on him next week, and he's bringing the number 7 back. He is Kimi Räikkönen's. Enough time has passed where that number 7 is now available, so he's bringing that number 7 back. It's his second choice number because he lost his first one to the other Kimi. So he's put in with Kimi's wherever he looks. But that has been our Qatar Grand Prix review. Thank you to AJ. Thank you to Rory. Thank you to Marshall. Thank you, as always, to our brilliant producer, Fly, who does a wonderful job behind the scenes and occasionally pops in to say hello. If you have enjoyed this video, then please do like, comment, and subscribe. It really does mean a lot to us that you guys are watching our content, that you are enjoying our content, and if one of us can get in and reply to your comment, then absolutely we will be there to do so. You can find AJ on Twitter at ShiverMeEaters. He's also on Threads. What's your username again on Threads?
AjitPaul96. I'll link it at the next video.
Yeah, AjitPaul96. Rory, you can find Rory Talks Motorsport on Twitter. Rory Talks F1 on Instagram and Threads. Other way around, is that Rory?
Rory Talks F1 on Twitter and Rory Talks Motorsport on Threads and Instagram.
There we go. Got it the wrong way around. Good start there, Baxty. And then you can find Double Wave Yellow at DBL Yellow on Threads. You can find me, BaxDB, on Threads or BaxDB F1 on Threads, BaxDB on Twitter, and also you can find me on my own YouTube channel, BaxDB F1 on the Twitter, on YouTube even. God, it's been a long day. But this has been our Qatar Grand Prix. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, and we'll speak to you all soon. One more race to go. Let's go.